Hi, good afternoon. My name is Amy Sparrow, and today we're going to talk about magical beliefs and amulets for your Anglo Saxon persona. I have a ton of material, so I'm just going to go ahead and start going through the material. If you have a question, this appears to be a very small class, you can feel free and unmute yourself and ask the question. Otherwise, I'm just gonna start on into the class. So here we go. What is this class about? This class is about the bags of items worn by Anglo-Saxon women who use the contents of those bags to perform magic. They were known as cunning women. Men did not appear to have performed magic in the Anglo-Saxon society, although they did have little bits of magic of their own, like beads on their swords. Now, if you study history at all, you know that the time period of the Anglo-Saxons was one of rampant illiteracy, and the Anglo-Saxons didn't leave much for us about their own beliefs about anything concerning their culture. But we have secondary sources that we can use. We have books of healing that were translated into Old English. We've got grave finds. We have sermons against pagan practices. So we know what they were doing by what the Christians were telling them not to do. And we have laws against Anglo-Saxon pagan practices. Let's talk a little bit about the ring pouches. In Anglo-Saxon culture, women kept amulets in ring pouches. These were worn at the waist. Amulets could also be worn as part of a necklace or hung from a belt. There are many different kinds of rings that were left over in graves. The fabric or skins of the pouches did not last in a burial, but we have metal rings, we've got ivory rings, we've got rings made from stag's antlers. And Meany, the author of the book that I base this class mostly upon, thinks that wooden rings would also have been used, but they have rotted away. So let's talk about what an amulet is. An amulet is something that can help you prevent evil, or it can help you have some positive outcome like good luck or healing. An amulet is not something that you swallow or consume. If it's burnt, swallowed, or consumed, it's considered medicine. We have an overlap with an amulet in medicine called a curing stone. I'm just gonna hold that up to my camera. Here's what something would be considered a curing stone. That's an ammonite fossil. That would be dipped in water and consumed. Like I should probably dip it in this water and consume it because I'm coughing. So that would not destroy the amulet. I would keep that amulet and I would put it back in my pouch and use it again, and the magic would just be renewed magically. There are 5 different types of amulets that Meany talks about. Vegetable, mineral, animal, manufactured, and found. We're gonna follow her groupings. She is the only person that I've found so far that seems to have studied Anglo-Saxon amulets in an extensive manner. And she spent about 16 years writing the book that I'm using as a basis for this class. So she did some extensive research. Just some background on her as an author. She was from Australia. So she wrote this book, obviously, in the ages before the internet. So a lot of her sources were probably faxes and through the mail to people in Great Britain and the continent. So let's talk about vegetable amulets first. And when Meany says vegetable, she doesn't mean tomatoes or cucumbers. She means a plant found in the wild that was used as some basis for a cure for illness or a curse. In this class, we're interested in objects that are found in burials. However, plant matter is not gonna survive a burial. So I have an extensive list of plants and their charms from Mini's book. And I published that in a newsletter at this address on the screen, https://karfg.weebly.com/newsletters. I'll leave that up on the screen for a minute so you guys can copy that down if you like. In there, you can find a bunch of plants and the spells or recipes to use that an Anglo Saxon would have used for healing magic. Once again, that's https://karfg.weebly.com/newsletters.html. So I'm going to briefly give you a taste of what those cures would have been, and then we're going to move on to the amulets that did survive. So, for example, castor oil. To ward off hail and tempest, you have this plant in your house, so you hang it in your house, and it will ward off tempest of hail. Or if you hang the seed on your ship, it is a wonder to the degree that it quietens everything, every tempest. And you shall take this plant, saying thus, plant rincinum, I pray you that you be present at my singing, and that you shall ward off hails and lightnings and all tempests through the name of the Almighty God, who commanded you to be born. And you shall be clean when you take this plant. Now, let me just give you a brief note about some of the words in the spells that you will find. These words have been looked at, and they're considered by the people that study language to be nonsense words. They're a collection of sometimes Latin, sometimes very old English, or nonsense words. They may have meant something at one time, but after being copied over and over and over again, they were changed into nonsense. Sweet clover. I bet no one in this class knew that if you pick sweet clover in the waning moon in the month of August and take the root and tie it to a thread and hang it on your neck, it's going to help you with dimness of your eyes. Apparently that works. Note that in this spell, there is a reference to a weaving thread. In many of the spells for plants, strings or weaving threads are part of the cure. You'll find them a lot. And we're going to talk about that later in the class. Periwinkle was a very popular cure-all for many things. It's good against snakes, animals, poison, malice, terror. And it's just good for you for a lot of things. You're not going to be harmed by poisons or anger. And to make this effective, you need to gather this plant when the moon is 9 nights old, and 11 nights, and 13 nights, and 30 nights, and when it is 1 night old. So you can see where our modern witches spells may have come from. When you look at the text, this is old. This is text that has been translated into Old English. So that ends my discussion of plant matter for this class. I'm going to give you a final note, and it's a little bit of a sad one. Throughout Nini's chapter about vegetable amulets, she talks about items like seed pods and oat galls and other plant matter that would have been part of a necklace or kept in a waist pouch that was actually found during digs. But then she goes on to say this phrase a lot: these items are no longer extant. What that means in academic terms is that the grave finds were discarded as unimportant or not conserved properly, which means they've disintegrated. Now, in our modern minds, this is horrific that somebody would discard things. But at the time, these are pre-1970 digs that she's talking about, and they didn't really have the concept at the time that plant matter was actually important to the burial that they were digging up. So it could be why those things were discarded or not taken care of. So let's move on to mineral amulets, a lot of which have made it through time in these burials. Some examples are amber, agates, amethyst, quartz crystal, and pyrite. And so let's first look at a law against magic stones. So there's an Icelandic law that was written about 920 that prohibits the practice of magic stones. People shall not have stones about them or fill them with magic power in order to tie on people or on cattle. If people put trust in stones to ensure their own health or that of cattle, the penalty is minor outlawry. However, some stones appear to have been sanctified by their church for use because people would not give up their pagan practices entirely. I'm just gonna make a note that if you want this presentation, I will email it to you so you don't have to drive yourself crazy taking notes. I'm willing to share this with anybody that needs it. It's a lot, we're covering a lot of stuff today, and I don't want people to drive themselves crazy.
A quick note, since you're drinking as well, if you are willing, you can email it to me, Sean Wilson, and
okay.
we will attach it to the video as a comment. We'll put it in the RUM's YouTube Google Drive, and then we can attach the presentation to the video.
So I can just mail it to the RUM Chancellor?
Yes, you can.
Okay, and I can find your email address somewhere on the website?
I will find our conversation and I'll send it to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was scrambling. I have been trying so hard to earn enough credits for degrees. I'm actually having to ice my wrist. So I super appreciate it because this class is very important to me. Thank you so much for teaching. I super appreciate it.
You are welcome. You're welcome. So with that, let's move on and maybe enjoy the content of the class without driving yourself crazy. So let's talk about amber. Amber is petrified tree sap, not stone, as we know these days. But the Anglo Saxons would not have known that. They would have just thought it was a lightweight yellow stone. It was warm to the touch, which made it unusual from a stone point of view. And their European contemporaries, so here's our secondary source that we get Anglo-Saxon beliefs from, they believed it protected against witchcraft, head pain, skin eruptions, and tonsillitis. At the time of Meany's book, published, which was 1981, about 150 Anglo-Saxon cemeteries contained amber. Not graves, cemeteries. So that's a lot more than just 150. Amber necklaces were very popular and found in a lot of different configurations. Amber was often mixed with rock crystal in necklaces. We know that it had great value because a cracked bead was found with holes drilled in each side so it could be repaired with thongs. So they really wanted to keep that bead around. The earliest amber bead was found in a 5th century grave as a sword bead. And it was the most frequently found stone in 6th century graves. Amber is found less frequently, if at all, in Christian graves. It lost its popularity over time, and we'll talk about that later. Let me just say what sword beads were, because I refer to them later in the class too. A sword bead was a bead attached to the hilt of a sword as a blessing, or to show that the sword was peace bonded, which meant you were not going to use it. We also believe that it imparted luck to the owner. Jet is another kind of bead that is found in Anglo-Saxon graves. Jet is a type of coal. It's petrified wood. It's found locally in Great Britain. It was found in 6th and 7th century graveyards. And Anglo-Saxon contemporaries on the continent believed that jet protected against thunder, poison, snakes, witchcraft, and attack from elves. Jet can be burned. It is very hard to carve, yet we have found beads and spindle whorls made out of it. And there's no admonitions from clergy against jet, which means that the church did not consider it evil. So let me just say as a side note here, you're going to hear a lot of me talking about amulets protecting against snakes and thunder. Those were the two things that appeared to be most problematic for Anglo-Saxons in their lives. They really disliked snakes and they really disliked thunder. So a lot of these stones protected against that. Also, when I talk about the continent, what that means, if you didn't know much about Anglo-Saxons, is that Anglo-Saxons were from 3 different areas of Europe and they migrated over to Great Britain. So archaeologists and other ists that study Anglo-Saxons believe that they would have brought the practices of the continent with them when they migrated over to Great Britain. That's why we believe that things written on the continent would apply also to the Anglo-Saxons. So let's move on to quartz beads. Crystal quartz was believed to be concentrated light and fire magic, which help with healing. Crystal quartz can be made into faceted beads or smooth beads. Sometimes if there was a large, smooth quartz ball, and Anglo-Saxons would put metal around the orbs and wore them on necklaces or from girdles, or they were just found loosely in a ring pouch, which we talked about earlier. And if you had a crystal ball, you considered to be very rich. Now, when I say crystal ball, I'm not talking big ball that you see the head of Madame Leona in Disney. I'm talking very tiny, tiny balls, which would be considered a large bead. Quartz has been found at 50 sites, some as early as the 5th century in Great Britain. Quartz was not as important as amethyst to the Christians. It was smooth round crystal quartz was associated with sieve spoons, which were small spoons with holes in them. We don't know why. We think it might have been a Roman practice pulled forward into Anglo-Saxon times, where in the Roman society, if you had a sieve spoon, it meant that you were the lady of the house because you would be sifting wine through that spoon. Faceted quartz could also be made into spindle whorls, and finding it is locally difficult. One thing I want you to know for your Anglo-Saxon persona, the practice of reading crystal balls didn't start until the 14th century. So please don't use your crystal balls to read the future when you're playing an Anglo-Saxon in the SCA. Quartz pebbles. Quartz was thought to have been a thunderstone, which meant it descended from heaven during a storm, and therefore it would prevent lightning strikes. Also, if you're a fan of Time Team, you will know that white quartz pebbles and lumps had been reported from prehistoric burials in Britain, the Isle of Man, and Ireland from the Stone Age onwards, and that includes Anglo-Saxon, and no one knows why. Chalk, you could probably consider it a poor man's quartz, was also available. Think about the chalk downs of England. Chalk beads and spindle whorls were found in 6th century cemeteries. Cuttlefish bones were also used for white beads. Chalk beads offered protection for children, and they were also used as sword beads. Miscellaneous stones. Stones with natural holes in them were considered magical. They protect against witches and nightmares. Modernly, these are called hag stones. Pyrite nodules were thought to be thunderstones, so they were put in a house to protect against lightning. Pyrite was buried in graves so that the dead would have the means to make fire in the next world. However, iron pyrite occurs naturally in chalk beds, so sometimes it's hard to tell if a nodule may have put in a grave intentionally, or if it was just backfill when they were covering the body. And finally, a piece of manganese has been found on an iron ring, and the meaning is completely unclear. I've included in the presentation a sample of grave contents involving stones. And you can look at that at your leisure later. I just wanted to give you proof of what was being found in graves in terms of collected contents. Moving on to animal amulets. When we turn to animal amulets, we're entering a very primitive world, and that includes bones being important, and fossils, which even though they're not bones, they're considered animals. So we're going to include those in this section. Wolf teeth and wolf hair and fossil shark teeth. So here's a prescription against wolf being harmed by wolves. If you carry wolf hair and you see wolf tracks, you're going to be safer than if the wolf sees you first. I'm not sure why carrying the wolf hair would help you, but apparently it did. In local folklore, shark's teeth were known as serpent's tongues. At the time of Meany's book, only one shark tooth had been found in an Anglo Saxon grave in Suffolk. But there's a lot of information about serpent's tongues in folklore. Animal fossils, sorry about that, animal fossils. Belemnites, and this is something I did not know before I started doing research for this class. Belemnites are fossilized parts of squids. They were considered to be elf arrows. They're about the size of a human thumb. And they're also considered to be leftovers of thunderbolts. And of course, they protected against lightning. Snake stones are fossilized mollusks. And you can see why they were considered something close to snakes, because they curve around like snakes. And they were considered antidotes for snake bites. Thunderstones, which I held up at the beginning of the class, are fossil sea urchins, and they are kept in homes to charm against lightning. They also kept milk from going sour, and they occurred more frequently in Anglo-Saxon graves than any other kind of amulet. To continue with fossils, we have fossil sponges. And Meany says in her book, so many of these occurred in the Anglo-Saxon huts at Westow Heath, Suffolk, that they must have been deliberately collected, probably from the fields around. Cowrie shells are also very popular. Nobody knows why the Anglo-Saxons liked cowrie shells. Cowrie shells sometimes look like genitalia to people. Sometimes they look like a half-opened eye. But since cowrie shells were buried mostly with women, archaeologists think that they were prescription against archaeologists thought that they help with fertility. Too many A words. Teeth. Horses' teeth were used as amulets to help babies cut their teeth. They were also found in graves because there was a rampant horse cult in the Anglo-Saxon Dark Ages. And archaeologists think that a single tooth may have been a stand-in for an entire sacrificed horse. and that would help the deceased transport from this world to the next. Or a single tooth might not have attracted the attention of a priest, whereas many teeth or an entire horse would have. Ox teeth have been found in graves, but it's difficult to know if that was because it was a burial feast or it had something to do with helping the deceased. There was no ox cult in Great Britain, but there was one in Germany where these people, or some of these people, came from. Dental health was of paramount importance to the Anglo Saxons, having no dentists themselves. And beaver teeth are some of the hardest teeth in the world. It is not unreasonable to assume that Anglo Saxons would have realized this, seeing animals gnaw on wood and be perfectly fine. So there's a lot of children that have been buried with a beaver tooth bead on a string around their neck. Moving on to teeth and tusks. A wolf's tooth can be tied on a child to keep away night terrors. It can also be used for a hunting charm. And note that it's very hard to tell the difference between a fox, a dog, and a wolf fang. I've got some samples on the slide here. There's a cure for herpes of the hand in Bald's Leech book. If you catch a fox, strike off the canine tooth while it's alive and let it run away, find the tooth in a fawn skin and have it on you, it's going to help you get rid of your hand herpes. Boar's tusks can also be worn as amulets for fertility and ferocity, but archaeologists don't know if which gender was actually wearing these boar's tusks. Antlers, claws, and bones. Stag antlers are used for protection and power. Sword beads can be made from them. Stag antlers can also be tied to horses and oxen to keep them free from disease. And since stags renew their antlers once a year, much like a snake sheds its skin, it's a symbol of rebirth and immortality. Just a side note, there is no indication of the size of the piece of stag antler that was tied to horses or oxen. I can't imagine a horse or an ox walking around with an entire stag antler on to help it keep free from harm, but who knows? Eagle claws were worn to prevent pain. Only 4 claws had been found at the time of Meany's book, but claws may be underrepresented in a grave find because they often disintegrate. If real claws could not be obtained, then they may be carved from bone or stone, and those were found too in graves. One note about eagle claws worn to prevent pain. There was a grave find in Meany's book that talked about a woman with a severely arthritic hip having an eagle claw buried right next to that hip. So, prevention of pain. Fish bones we don't know much about. They were found in graves, but there's no local folklore that we know about concerning fish bones. We don't know if it meant anything special or they were just odd looking items that were worthy of being worn on a necklace. Manufactured items is where things get interesting to me anyway. Manufactured items appear to have been made as amulets, for example, model weapons, shields, buckets, and tools, also glass beads and whorls and rings. A lot of it protected against the evil eye. A lot of it were thought to be bringing luck. And I've included information about wire rings and miniature buckets later. Model tools. We don't know what these meant. Model tools have been found and they might have meant protection, but without documentation, we can only guess. Model tools have been found in men's, women's, and children's graves. I put a picture on here. This is a one-to-one drawing in Meany's book of some axes and a spear. And you can see that they're only an 1.5 inches high. Think about making something that small with Anglo Saxon technology. Now, some of these items may have been found and picked up. They may have been Roman votives, but we don't know. Anglo Saxons apparently loved to pick up stuff that the Romans left behind. Buckets. I'm working on making a reproduction bucket. Unfortunately, I don't have one for this class. The purpose of these little tiny buckets is unclear. Fabric and threads in them seem to make them amulets. The size of these buckets is about 3/8 wide by 3/8 high. That is tiny. And we've found rolled wads of material in buckets, textile fragments, and thread. And they were hung in a string on a necklace. Very odd. Knots and rings. Knot rings were found in the mid-6th and 7th century women's graves. They were thought to confuse the evil eye because the evil would get lost in the knot on the ring. Gold rings were thought to cure eye problems. And we have spells for this. And then we have an 8th century sermon against using gold rings to cure the soreness of your eyes. Iron was used a lot against evil spirits. So here's a prescription for, an admonition against using iron rings. Don't use them. That means you're not Christian, you are pagan. Spangles. Spangles were little pieces of bronze sheet metal, often in a triangular shape. I've included a picture from Meany's book here where you can see grave finds that were spangles. Sometimes they had a punch design on them. These were often attached to hairpins. But as in all ancient cultures, pretty things got reused for other things. They could have been reused for earrings. They could have been strung on a necklace, or they could have been attached to pouches. And it's possible when they were attached to pouches that they took on amuletic qualities of their own. Now we're going to talk about keys. Keys appear to have been borrowed from the Romans as a symbol of a woman being in charge of her own house. These reproduction keys, this is from Meany's book, but I have friends that have reproduction keys. They're about 4 or 5 inches long, and they get hung from belts. In Roman times, they used to be real keys, but in Anglo-Saxon times, they started to become more symbolic and less key-like, as you can see from this image. Work boxes or relic boxes. 36 of these had been found by Meany's time, and they were made of bronze, suspended from a belt by a chain or a loop. And sometimes they held organic matter like thread or fabric. The fabric may have been offcuts, but there really wasn't enough in a tiny little box for them to be useful. A later author got access to the actual artifacts that we have drawings of here, and she saw that on the inside of this artifact number 1, there appeared to be needle marks. So it was probably a needle case. And boxes with no lids, and these were sometimes just metal tubes, which did not have a lid, they were just closed by pieces of fabric being pushed up into the open end. These were probably also needle cases. So let's talk here about magic worked into fabric and thread. We have another admonition against putting magic into your fabric. Eligus of Noyen said, he preached that a woman should not name other unfortunate persons, either at the loom or in dyeing or in any kind of work with textiles. Presumably, the idea was that the maledictions were made powerful by being, as it were, woven into cloth. So if we look at small pieces of fabric and thread kept in work boxes, it probably could be that they were considered magic and could be used for either healing or curses. If you go look at that article that I wrote about vegetable amulets, a lot of the prescriptions say, tie this on the body with a thread, or put this claw in a piece of fabric and keep it on your person. So we have lots of references to thread and fabric that may be considered magic. Found amulets is something that you pick up because you think it looks nice. And we don't know why we have that impulse. Who of you hasn't gone to a beach and picked something up on the sand because you thought it looked nice? Or you took a hike and you crossed a stream and you saw a rock in the water and you picked up a little pebble and brought it with you. We all do that. And it's true that the Anglo Saxons did it as well, because items like that have been found. So let's talk about beads. The Anglo Saxons were a bit obsessed with the Romans. They like to pick up trinkets around ancient stone buildings that the Romans left. So if they found something around a Roman ruin, like as not, especially if it was a bead, they were going to pick it up and take it with them. Dark blue beads were of Iron Age manufacture. Dark blue beads were found in Roman graves. So it's not unusual to think that an Anglo-Saxon might pick up a dark blue bead thinking that it was Roman. Melon beads of pale blue or turquoise were of Roman manufacture. Clear green glass beads found in later 6th century graves were probably Anglo-Saxon. And as Meany says, we must assume that beads of all kinds would have been regarded in the same way. That is, they were magic. And I think that it's certainly right in arguing that single beads found with any children of whatever kind were amulets against the evil eye. Spindle whorls were also considered magic. Now, if you go back a few slides, you can see that anybody doing any kind of textile craft is going to consider it magical. So, excuse me. We have a spell from a leech book saying, for cheek disease, take a whorl, which a woman spins with, bind on his neck with a woolen thread, and rinse within with hot goat's milk, and it will be well for him. So spindle whorls, which is an everyday work tool, were also considered magic. Coins. The Anglo-Saxons loved Roman coins. And this is the most common found amulet. The pagan English did not use coins for money. They used them for jewelry. Coins were pierced or loops were added, and then it was worn on the body. However, even though it was the most popular found amulet, we don't know what it meant to them, unfortunately. Iron nails from Roman ruins were also picked up and placed under beds to expel demons. Let's talk about flints before we move on to our last section. Flint arrowheads in Europe were thought to be the work of elves or fairies. Though at the time of Meany's book, no flint arrowheads had been found in Anglo-Saxon graves, worked pieces of flint have been found. There's a possibility that these work flints were used to make weather magic, such as creating hail or storms. Weather makers were condemned by church councils from the late 7th to early 9th centuries in Gaul. So this tells us that flints being used as weather magic it's been around for a long time. So our last topic is something old. And this seemed a bit confounding for a while to the archaeologists. In the collection of magical assemblages, which were held in a pouch, there was something old, an object at least 100 years older than the person being buried. And these items, in our eyes, appeared to be useless bric-a-brac. For example, bronze ends from belts, knife handles without blades, late Roman belt plate that was broken, a ring brooch, brooches without pins, keys, D-shaped bronze buckle, pinless brooches, broken pieces of glass. The meaning of these objects is very unclear. They may have been curiosities, or they may have been special magical items that worked for the woman who carried them around. They may have been used in divination if the entire pouch of amulets was upended on the ground. We just don't know. So what were Meany's conclusions for all of this information? So given the documented prohibitions against witches, magicians, and sorcerers found in Ethelred's 6th code, that if witches or sorcerers, magicians or prostitutes, murderers or perjurers are found in the land, they should be zealously driven out. Meany concludes that the collections of objects found in Anglo Saxon women's graves must have been used in magical practices such as divination or healing. The women who possessed them were the cunning women of the tribe. All of this evidence concerns sorcery, but it's also possible that the contents were used in white witchcraft, which is in healing rituals. So any of these items could be thought to be used as magic. What does this mean for us who want to recreate the life of Anglo Saxons? Well, if you're a male persona, it doesn't mean very much, because carrying around bags of amulets seem to have been women's stuff. We haven't found anything in graves that have been identified as male skeletons. If you are recreating a female persona, it means that you have a bag of magical treasures at your waist. And this can include anything that's a subset of the items we discussed today: beads, coins, glass, broken jewelry, animal teeth, stones, metal rings, and wire work rings. It also means that you could have plant amulets in your bag, of which we have no evidence, physical evidence, but we have a lot of evidence in writing that plants were used in healing magic. So that's what I've got for you today about Anglo-Saxon magic. I know that I went really fast because it was a lot of information to cover, but hopefully you can use this presentation to help you in your own Scadian Anglo-Saxon play. And we've got about 10 minutes, a little less maybe, for any questions that you have. So I will open the floor to anybody that wants to speak.
I don't have a question. Oh, this is hard. I just want to say thank you. I thought I was going to have to give up everything about my persona that I've developed for 20 years. I am Enchanted Dorian Plumindad Dragon. I make those items. I live in a house with fairy rings, and I have the crystal dragon from Gulf Wars. I thought I was going to have to give that up, and you just showed me I'm documentable. I can do arts and science on what research I have been doing for over 15 years.
Aw,
Thank you.
you're
Just
welcome.
when I saw the magical classes on here, I was determined. I didn't have a single credit. I've been pulling all-nighters. I have a stack of notebooks this high. I've been icing my hand. I want adept so bad. But now this alone was enough. I'm documentable. Thank you so much. I don't even know how to say what mid-realm means to me at this point. I was born in Kokomo, Indiana. Yeah, just thank you. I don't want to take up the whole class, but thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I would say that you should take a look at the bibliography at the end of class and go to interlibrary loan, because a lot of these books are not available, and go check them out and see what you can get out of those books. I'm happy that I made you happy today. Do I have any other questions?
Just kind of a comment. I mean, I would like to thank you for the class, but I did study anthropology a little bit in my undergrad studies. I never did finish it. I couldn't decide on a discipline, but it is a shame that so much was lost early on because they didn't consider it important. I am glad that they are now considering those things, like contents of vessels and things, to be very important, because it gives us a whole picture on people's lives.
Yes, I agree with you. I was also an anthropology major in my younger days, so I find this all incredibly fascinating. Do I have any other questions from anybody?
Just to share some comments. Great class again, as everyone has said. What I find interesting is mine's a late period Anglo-Saxon persona, is just how the pagan practices and then the Christian practices overlap. I mean, you referenced the Ball's Leech book, so even though arguably that's written in the Christian period, there's often references back to these pagan practices, as you're showing. One of the things that struck out to me in your presentation was prohibition against using iron rings. Yet Saint Dunstan, clearly a Christian saint later in life, the reason we hang horseshoes up is because of his tales against the devil. So yeah, there's a prohibition, but it probably wasn't very serious as those kind of things continued to happen. Yeah,
I'm with you. I think that sometimes people just gave up. They're just like, okay, we can't make them stop, so we're gonna make it holy. We're gonna take it on.
And then you repurpose it. It's like, oh, it's not a pagan iron ring; it's a ring of iron that Saint Dunstan blessed.
It's a soft conversion. It's a soft conversion. They took over sacred sites and put, because people kept going there, so they put up their churches there, and then people kept going to the sacred site that they knew, but now it's Christian. So a lot of it, a soft conversion.
Absolutely.
I hadn't heard that term before, but yeah,
I just kind of made it up, actually. So don't think that it sounded right to me.
It's great though, right? Because you only remember as far back as your grandparents, right? And that time, maybe that's 30 years at that time. So like your great grandchildren would not have any memory of that being a pagan site. They would only remember it as a Christian site.
One thing I've heard that I did not make up, and it's called prime real estate. Things were built in an area for a purpose, a reason. They were usually really good areas. So Roman forts were built over ring forts, and then from Roman up to now a lot of things were built in the same area, because they were good spots to build. They were good spots for fortresses and battlements and things like that. So prime real estate.
Again, something, if you're not a fan of Time Team, I highly recommend go out and watch some of that stuff. That they go over that prime real estate over and over and over again.
I love Time Team.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna close. If there's no other questions, I'm gonna empty the room out for the next instructor. Does anybody have anything to say? No? All right.